Let's start right away with Mike Tomlin and Pittsburgh.
Yep.
Has the end of the road come there? It seems to have seems to be a lot of disgruntled people in Pittsburgh in terms of fan base. 18 years, but is it time?
Do I think it'll happen? No. Do I think it should? I'm starting to think that maybe the time is there to think about it, which is usually a year or two before something actually happens. But, it was interesting. I was actually, I actually had somebody ask me this question. I think it was last week. What's the difference between Mike McCarthy and Mike Tomlin? And I actually thought about it and I was like, you know what? Like, if you actually think about the resumes, they're almost the same. So, I had a mailbag question about Tomlin's future and I did the blind resume thing. And I'm just telling you guys, it was really close. You know what I mean? They both have coached 18 seasons. The win total, the regular season win total was close. Tomlin was a little ahead on that. The playoff win total, McCarthy was a little ahead on that. I think it was 11-8. They both have won one Super Bowl. Tomlin's been to two, but then McCarthy's been to four conference title games, and Tomlin's only been to three. So, I think it's interesting because you think of the way those two are perceived. And I mean, there have been times, and I love Mike, but there have been times when people have sort of tried to cast him as this bumbling idiot, and it's very different from the perception of Mike. And I'm not saying that to denigrate Mike. I think Mike's fantastic, but I do think that there comes a point when, you look at it and say, is it time to turn the page? And so much of it with Mike, I think, is you have this coach and this program and everything else, and you want to keep feeding it, and you never want to tear it down. You never want to go through a full tear down. So they've kept feeding the program and they've kept it competitive throughout. And I think that's really to a credit to them, how long they've been able to keep it at least on level ground. But if you are looking at it and saying, is it time that we actually go through a tear down and we actually, move some of our valuable assets and we get a lot younger across the board, because they've never really done that since Mike's been there. If we're going to do that over the next year or two, is that when we turn the page? And to me, I think that would be part and parcel to any decision that they would make here, right? It's not just, are we changing coaches? It's, do we actually want to go through a full rebuild, which a lot of teams do, and the Steelers almost never have. It's a big picture question. I think after 8 years of pretty consistently being in the playoffs, but never winning a playoff game, it's a question I think you have to ask if you're there. And again, if you're asking that question, I think it naturally flows into a question about Tomlin's future and whether or not it's right to have him, captain that rebuild, and whether or not he would want to captain that rebuild.
It's so funny because you actually stole Amy's favorite expression, and do what? And I want to dive into this a little bit deeper and unpack this, because we really try to go past the headlines on this podcast. You said something really interesting. Tomlin is looked at as this wise scribe, and some people look at McCarthy like he's a bumbling idiot. Why do you think that is?
I think it's, you guys remember, was it the Kennedy-Nixon debate, right? Where I think it was people who listened on the radio.
It was the sweating.
Right. And so people who listened on the radio thought Nixon won, but then people who watched it on TV, and it wasn't that many people back then because not everybody had TV, thought Kennedy overwhelmingly won, right? I think that I bring that up because I think a lot of times how someone presents can affect perception in a natural way, and so I do wonder, if the way that Mike Tomlin presents strength, right, and projects this, aura about him, and Mike doesn't really have that as much. And so you do wonder if a part of it's just based on our own perceptions, and a part of it's based on, when you look at Mike Tomlin, you see something and then you say, okay, well, that represents him in all ways. And then you look at McCarthy and you think the same thing. I think that could definitely be part of it. I think the drama at the end in Green Bay, the fact that McCarthy's already been fired, everything that goes with coaching in Dallas, I think that's part of it too, is the organizations they've been a part of, where Pittsburgh is so buttoned up and Pittsburgh is so straight-laced. And the same way you never heard like questions of it ever being a circus or anything like that being asked of Bill Cowher. You really don't hear those questions asked to Mike Tomlin. So I think our own perception can kind of fuel some of that stuff sometimes. And I think both guys are excellent head coaches. Like, I think both guys on balance over the last 20 years are among the top 10 guys to coach in the NFL. But, perception certainly is different on the two of them.
Check out new episodes of What the Football with Suzy Shuster and Amy Trask every Tuesday. Watch us on the Rich Eisen Show YouTube page or follow and listen wherever you get your podcasts.